I made this statement at the end of a conversation I had with a group of clients a couple of weeks ago, and I want to spend some time today defending it. Okay.
Excellent.
Here's a statement. I said, and I quote myself, because that's what I do. I quote myself. Quoting myself, if we're truly honest about the consequences of our work on the people that we serve, then each and every one of us has a moral and societal obligation to grow our business. One more time. If we are truly honest about the consequences of our work on the people that we serve, each and every one of us has a moral and societal obligation to grow our business. Is that too much? Is that too intense for today?
Imagine if I just said yes and just shut this
Yeah.
whole
Like,
thing down.
how deep do you want to go today, Karie? That's the question.
No, let's talk about it because I think it's obviously an attention getter, but also really interesting in a conversation that we have on a pretty regular basis with folks as they're coming through the program.
So here's kind of the problem, if you will. Okay, most people naturally, myself included, when you get started in business, you tend to be motivated by your own self interest. It's normal. It's natural. Don't feel bad about it. Typical motivations are I don't want to work for somebody else. I want to be my own boss. I want autonomy. I want flexibility. I want freedom. I want to make more money. I don't want to cap on my income because of a job. I want to, uncap, unlimit my income potential. I want to, it's I, right? That's typical. Again, don't feel bad. That was me. And everyone has some level of self-interest in their business pursuit. Perfectly normal. The problem that I see, and if we think about, what is the purpose of the human brain? The purpose of the human brain is to ensure survival. So therefore, when your survival needs are met, which are quite minimal, right? Then the brain doesn't really want you going out there and building a bigger business and growing and scaling and engaging in all these risks because, well, you're good. Your survival needs are met. Rationally, you may want a larger business, more clients, more revenue, but your brain will then start to self-sabotage to keep you safe. So my contention here is if your motivation is limited to your own self-interest, to taking care of your own needs, that's a pretty low bar. You'll do that hopefully quite easily. And then the motivation to go beyond that uh, wanes and isn't available to you, even though you might logically want to go beyond that.
I wish I disagreed because it would make a much better podcast episode, probably, but I don't. And what I think is really interesting is that, you identified the fact that the drive that comes from self-interest can be limited, right? And so I guess the real question is, okay, what is the thing that keeps me interested? What's the thing that keeps me excited? These are the conversations we have, right? Because I think two things happen. One is your self-interested stance limits your drive. And also it's really easy to use, the fact that you don't need more, that you have enough, or that, you've built the business to a reasonable size, right, to meet your needs, to stop you from moving forward. And not to stop you from moving forward, but stop you from even thinking about what that could look like. So tell me, what's the real motivator?
Well, I mean, this is where there's an interesting study by a famous psychologist named Adam Grant, and he shares this, I believe, in a book called Give and Take, where they studied a group of university fundraisers. These are the people from your alma mater who are always calling you. I think we're less aggressive about this in Canada than Americans are. They all have fundraising departments, and I haven't gotten a call. Come to think of it, so my alma mater not doing a great job. But the ones that call you up and you look, we're looking to raise money and blah blah blah. We've got an event, benefit, fundraiser, whatever, right? So these people have jobs. They are presumably, motivated by their own self-interest, right? They've got performance measures and targets to hit. They likely get a commission and bonuses, so they're motivated to hit those targets to get paid. they had some of these folks briefly meet a student who had directly benefited from the funds they raised. So a scholarship student. They had them meet a scholarship student who was able to attend that particular institution as a result of the funds that were raised to provide scholarships. Nothing else changed. Just this brief meeting with a scholarship student, a beneficiary of the work that they do. Okay. Strategy didn't change, script didn't change, training, nothing else changed. And weekly revenue more than doubled. And call time, i.e., time on the phone with busy people with money, call time increased by 142%. So more time on the calls, more engagement, and ultimately revenue more than doubled in the study. So what happened? Did all of a sudden did their mortgage go up and they have more bills now and therefore they're more motivated to do a better job? No. What happened is they felt more connected to the beneficiaries of their work, the people that they ultimately help, the people that are ultimately impacted. They felt more connected to them. And then therefore the work had more meaning. The work had more personal meaning to them. They call this pro-social motivation. This is the idea of like the motivation of the drive that comes from caring about the impact that your work has on others more than merely satisfying your own self-interest.
Yeah, and I think we see this everywhere, right? This is the product of human beings being a social animal, and the fact that we live in these hierarchies and we live in these connected networks means that often it is much easier to accomplish something on behalf of somebody else. So let's think about it in the context of building your business. You're a consultant, and most likely what happened is you went down the path that you did because you see something that you can do for somebody, right? You see a way that you can make someone's life easier, that you can solve a problem for them, that you can remove some kind of pain that they're suffering from. And yes, that turns into eventually like me building a business, right? And the notion of what does that look like and what do I need to do and what are all the inputs that need to exist. But at the base of it, you could have done anything, right? You chose something as a consultant that benefited other people. And so I think most people know that at the beginning and then lose track of it, lose track of it because they hear how a business must be grown, right? What has to be in place, what it should look like. And I think what we're, you know, rallying for here is getting back to that really basic understanding of why you're doing this in the first place.
And I think it pushes you further ultimately, right? Like, because, most people, when you think about, what you actually need, I mean, your needs are probably fairly simple, even if you live a lavish lifestyle. I mean, how much money do you really need? Right. And I think that's that kind of self-interest is motivating to an extent. But if I ask a much broader question than that, then I ask you, how can you maximize the value that you create and contribute to the economy and society at large? Right. If you think about business as as not merely about a vehicle through which you make money, but a vehicle through which you create value for the people around you, because that's what it is, right? And think about some of the, the key institutions that we consider to be part of, our economy, things like banks. Why do banks exist? Yes, to make money, and there's a real tangible social utility in it. Like we wouldn't be able to function as an economy without banks. Think about farms and grocery stores and the entire value chain in between. How hard would it be to live and to survive in an urban center without grocery stores that, that ultimately bring food from farms and make them accessible, or without farms and farmers who cultivate crops and raise animals and so on and so forth, right? Like we can look at these types of businesses and, even accounting firms, law, like we can look at these and go, yeah, they serve a social utility. We would have problems if these types of businesses did not exist. Do you think that way about your consulting business? It's easy for some of those examples, but my argument is that you need to see your business in the same light, that your business creates really tangible economic social value. It makes people's lives better. And if you see that to be true, and we can maybe go a little bit deeper on that, but if you believe that to be true, then why wouldn't you want more people to ultimately benefit from the work, as long as there's more out there to serve?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is how quickly we can sort of disconnect from that narrative. And, it might be worth talking about what we do, right? We've been at this for a while. And certainly, yes, we talk about how many clients we brought on board and, what does that mean financially and all of those things. But let's talk for a minute about how we stay connected to, the mission. How do we really wake up every day and decide that you know, it is going to be better for the people around us to, move their way into the 90-day pipeline and learn the things that we're teaching. So tell me, for you, how does that happen? How do you stay connected to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what you're looking for, and you could tell me more if I'm off the mark. But I'll tell you what comes to mind.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things that we decided to do, as part of this podcast, but it had broader consequences than the podcast, was we decided to go back and actually interview clients who have exited the program 12, 24, sometimes months, I was going to say, sometimes years and years later. One of our more recent interviews with Erica Lee Garcia, she was in the program 7 years ago, right? And one of the motivations behind that was, we know what happens in the limited time that we're engaged in the program for a few months, but we actually don't have a really great idea of what happens months and years later. So part of the interest there was, let's go back and interview some of these folks and just catch up. Like, what's happened? Where you been? What have you been doing? How's business? What have you built? And we've documented, many of these stories in the podcast. And the short answer is, we had no idea, right? What people are doing. Erica Lee Garcia presented that she had just closed an $800,000 deal. Mark Johnson built a, 20-person company. Many others have scaled to multiple seven figures. Others are operating smaller, boutique consultancies, but are having the time of their lives, become thought leader. Like, there's a whole range of outcomes, not merely explosive revenue growth, but all kinds of things in between that we didn't know about. We weren't aware of. And we kind of saw the first degree consequences of these clients working with us. And yeah, they built pipeline and they got some revenue, and that was great. And we have testimonials of all of them speaking to that, right? But then there was like a second degree consequence and a third degree consequence and a fourth degree consequence that we didn't know about, we couldn't see. And I would say for me, that was an exercise that really broadened my perspective on the consequences of our work. I think a lot of consultants are really heads down on delivering the particular outcomes that they deliver. Call that first degree consequence. Great, fine, you should be. But if you step out from that for a moment and consider, what are the consequences of those consequences? What's that ripple effect of consequences, and how does that affect the people that you serve and the people they serve? And then one of the things that, well, I realized through that exercise is, by enabling our clients to serve more people, they create more value for their clients, right? And so there's this really interesting cascading ripple effect of consequences that I don't think I really appreciated prior to this exercise.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so what's at the base of that is an understanding that, we need to stay connected to that purpose, because it's too easy to fall into the trap of just looking at the numbers, right? How many clients, how many dollars? It's all well and good. Of course, you want to pay attention to the health of your business, but that's not the thing that drives everybody. And so, whether it is following up with previous clients, whether it is keeping a file of what impact you've had, even at the first degree, right? What are the benefits? Because you may not have the opportunity to do these interviews later on the way that we do. But, how do you keep front of mind the impact that you're having? So yeah, it might be, like I said, keeping a list of what you have helped clients accomplish in your engagement, something that you go back to, or, just reconnecting yourself to the purpose, the reason, the why you did this when you're talking to clients or potential clients, having those conversations about what they need and, how you can ease their way to get there. But what's really, like, as I'm saying, at the base of this is just understanding that you need to maintain that connection, because that's the thing that's going to keep you driving in the, direction you want to be driving, um, when those other things no longer work as motivators.
Yeah, and as I think about it, in the early days when maybe we didn't have clients that were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, and
Mhm.
it was all very much immediate and raw, and maybe those second, third, fourth order consequences hadn't materialized yet. I remember I had a Google file, a Google Doc,
Yes.
and anytime a client said anything, either in conversation or via email or via Slack, about a result that they got or the impact the work's having on them or what they're getting out of it, I would aggressively write those things down
Mhm.
and I would capture them. I would put them in this document. And this was, maybe even before I had or we had that many testimonials. And I would consult that document just probably on a daily basis just to remind myself of, oh, this is why.
Yeah.
So when I'm not really feeling in the mood to take another sales call, right? Or when I'm feeling like my motivation's waning and I'm getting a little bit tired, maybe approaching some early signs of burnout, I could, consult this document, steep myself in the real tangible human stories
Mhm.
of the people that we serve and the impact that they said the work is having on them. And that's got a really funny way of motivating you, right? So I know after I get off any one of these podcast interviews with a former client, and I'm able to see, wow, what did they actually build, what happened as a result of the work that we did. um my motivation's far greater than it would ever be if it was about lining my pockets.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. So you said at the beginning that I forget your quote. You said it twice, so I should remember it, but
You forgot my quote.
you forgot your quote. But the point of the quote was that you have an obligation to grow, right? You have an obligation to continue to expand that impact. But I'm interested to talk a little bit more about this because does that mean grow indefinitely? Does that mean everybody has to grow all the time? What does that look like? Because not everyone, people are listening to us thinking, well, that's all well and good, but I'm not trying to build $1 billion organization. That's not what I'm here for. What do you mean by grow?
So what I mean by grow is I mean increase and maximize the economic and social value of your work,
Mhm.
but put boundaries around it. In other words, there should be some limitations, some boundaries beyond which you're not willing to transgress. Obviously, right? So, I'll give you an example. Obviously, for me, and this is going to vary by person. For me, my family is a boundary, right? The time that I spend with my kids, that's a boundary. So, do I want to grow my business? Yes. Do I want to serve my clients, more clients? Yes. Do I want to grow my impact and create more value? Absolutely. Am I willing to at least consistently work more than 40 hours a week and, miss dinner and miss hockey practice and work on weekends? No. So that's there's a clear boundary. In other words, yes, I want to create this social value for the betterment of the economy and society and the communities that I'm a part of, but I have really tangible boundaries around how I want to do that and what I'm willing to do and not do. So the time with family is a clear boundary. I have many others, as will you. So the directive here is not grow for as much as you can, as long as you can, and your personal values or boundaries, like throw them to the wind, and that's not an excuse. No, it's okay to have boundaries. I think some of those boundaries are really intelligent excuses that we could probably talk through. I think one of the things that people, you know, um, will object to in this is, well, I don't want to compromise the quality of my work. I think that's more of an excuse than a boundary, but it is good to be clear on what your boundaries are.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, spending time with your family can be an excuse as well, right? What we're really talking about is getting like actually clear on what those boundaries are and not conflating those with an inability or a, lack of desire to go out and have more impact. Because we
Yeah.
know constraints are valuable, right? Like the fact that you want to be at hockey practice, at many hockey practices, um, means that you got to work more effectively and more efficiently so that you can still maximize the amount of impact that you're having. And that's very different than saying, oh, you know what, I need to be home by 4 o'clock, therefore I can't, right? I can't do whatever the thing is that I need to do. So as many of the conversations are that we have here, this is about really like looking at yourself and being honest with yourself and being clear about, when are you just making excuses for yourself? When are you scared? When are you feeling a bit lazy? When are those things rearing their heads?
Well, I think that's a really interesting example, right? So, my boundary is probably a relatable one to people. So if it sounds like this, well, I have kids and I have a family, and so I can only operate a business of this size. I can't grow beyond that.
Mhm.
By the way, I used to say that. Excuse. That's an excuse, and you're lying to yourself. Okay. If it sounds like, okay, well, here's how much I'm willing to work on a weekly basis. Here's what I can put in order to protect the time that I have with my family. And within that, I'm I'm creatively going to find ways to increase my output, increase my, my production, and grow the business and create more value within that constraint. That's a constraint. That's a legitimate constraint that you've defined. And you're therefore seeking to work through the constraint to proactively and creatively find ways to grow the business.
Yeah. Any other reasons not to grow?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, I think once you've got your constraints or your boundaries in place, and there should be constraints and boundaries around your time, your mental health, the risks you're willing to take. I think those are all things to consider. But once you've kind of constructed your boundaries, I think what you're left with is no more excuses.
Mhm.
Because again, at the end of the day, what I'm saying here is if you believe that you have value, you believe that you create value, and you believe that there are more people out there that could benefit from your value, then once you've got all your boundaries and constraints organized, I think all that's left to do is go and create more value and grow the business.